a very, very warm welcome to this session, which is about learning playfully. I'm Linda Amran Cooper, and I'm Director of the Centre for Online and Distance Education based at the University of London. And it's wonderful to see you here and to have our fantastic presenters, Lewis and Susannah. And I'm just going to say a little bit about this series of webinars that we're running this year. If you wouldn't mind popping to the next slide for us, Lewis. So this is our digital education series, and we've got 7 webinars that are looking at online and digitally supported learning and teaching. So we've had, this is the 4th of our sessions. We've had an overview of thinking about approaches to online learning, then thinking about some of the theories that support online learning and really trying to get under the hood of that. Last session on the 15th of January was looking at synchronous and asynchronous learning, and today a really, really important and exciting topic, which is learning playfully. We've got AI in learning and teaching coming up, and then we've got a pair of webinars, one looking at purposeful assessment and the next one looking at purposeful feedback. I think that's it, is it? Is there one more? No, that's the end of the series. So just before we go on to handing over to Lewis, just to say that the series has been curated by a team from the Centre for Online and Distance Education, supported by some amazing presenters who've joined us, including Susannah, who's here today, which is fantastic. And there isn't, what we try to do is put together a bit more than just a webinar. So we're recording the sessions, and you can see them on our YouTube channel. We're also providing resources to help you reflect on these sessions, and some reading lists as well to go with the sessions. And altogether, if you'd like to engage in a bit more of a reflective activity, we're offering the opportunity for you to submit a reflective reflection on the series, or at least 5 of the webinars out of the series, and then gain a certificate of achievement. So there's information about that was shared with you in the email, and we'll reshare that when we're sending out the resources. We also put together a report on the event as well, so there's a lot of resource that you can draw back to, and I know that some of you mentioned that this is your first code event, so welcome to the Centre for Online and Distance Education. It's a really vibrant community, and what we expect is lots and lots of engagement in the chat, and we will hope to draw that into the conversation and make this as dynamic as we possibly can. And in the last 15 minutes of the session, what we'll do is turn off the recording and open that up at 2 o'clock to more of a discussion opportunity, but it won't be recording. So thank you very much. You can, yes, there's a question from Tom. You can obtain recordings of all the past sessions. They're all in our YouTube channel, and I expect Matt at some point will put the YouTube link into the chat for us. Okay, handing over to Lewis, one of our fantastic code fellows based in Portugal, which I always find really exciting. I'm hoping he's going to invite me soon to visit when the weather gets a bit warmer.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Linda, and welcome everyone to this great session. Before I go into the introductions, I just want to very briefly share with you the expectations for the session today. So we will be exploring this idea of playful techniques that support deep thinking and learning, without going to this idea of being childish or too childish, and Susannah will explore that in a second. The second point is that we want to reframe creativity as a rigorous practice that involves risk-taking and productive vulnerability. And finally, the third point I'd like to highlight is that we want to empower students to own decisions, this idea of agency, to critically engage and build motivation through shared over-learning outcomes. So, obviously that's me today with you. I'm, as Linda said, one of the Code Fellows, and currently teaching at the Portuguese Open University. And I have the pleasure to have with us today to run the session Professor Susannah Quinsee, who is a leading academic and vice president for digital student experience at City St. George's University of London, where she champions creative student-centered learning. I would say Susannah is not your typical academic, as her research doesn't just unpack leadership, it plays with it. And Susannah is known for her work on playful learning, leadership, and change management. And she's involved in projects that explore how games, role play, and creativity can transform higher education. I had the pleasure of teaching alongside her on the MA in academic practice when I was at City St. George's until very recently. And I learned a lot from her imaginative approach to teaching and learning. So thank you so much, Susannah. I know you are very busy, so I do appreciate your time and I look forward to the session. So over to you.
Thank you so much, Louis, and thank you for inviting me to give the webinar today. I'm really honoured to be here, actually, and I hope that you have, from this session, you're able to take away some ideas to impact on your own practice. I'm also really keen to hear from you all as well, because I feel very much that playful learning is a collaborative activity, as we'll probably come on to later in the discussion. When I've tried to just do it on my own, I've spectacularly failed. So actually working with other people is definitely a win in this space. We're going to explore how playful practices can enhance adult learning outcomes and use some techniques along the way, provided the technology works. And if it doesn't, we'll try it anyway. So it might be chaos, it might work brilliantly, or it might be somewhere in between. And that's pretty much what it's like often working in the space of playful learning. So as Louis said, I'm Susannah. On the slide, you've got Lego Mini Me. Pink is my favorite color. I'm actually wearing pink today. And I've had an interest in play and playful learning for probably a long time, almost 20 years, which sounds quite horrific, actually, because I like to think I'm not that old. I think I started to realize the power of play when I had a young child and I went for a job interview. And as part of my vision, I was creating a new e-learning team and I used a child's toy to exemplify that vision. And I got the job. So I thought, great, I'm going to keep trying to do this kind of thing. And when I was successful in gaining my National Teaching Fellowship in the UK, I trained as a Lego Serious Play practitioner, and that literally changed my life. I spent 5 days in a windowless room in a hotel in Bloomsbury, London, surrounded by Lego, and it transformed my practice. So I often see actually engaging with technology as a form of play, and Louis and I were talking about this in preparation for the seminar. So the two things intersect really nicely actually today as well. And when you try things, which for me is often the kind of foundation of play, you just want to try it and see what happens. And I often feel at my most vulnerable when I'm playing on that learning edge between the kind of comfort and utter chaos. So what I'm going to talk about today is taking a very expansive view of play and playfulness and really seeing it as a mindset that can enable you to think about how to do things differently. As a senior leader in my own institution, as Louis said, I try and embody playful leadership. I have a huge rainbow on my wall, which I think is part of this playful mindset, and really trying to encourage others to engage in play and playfulness. I have a cupboard of joy, as I call it, which is full of craft materials, and another one full of Lego. And for me, it's all about how creativity can work to get ourselves out of our comfort zone. So finding the flow in what we're doing, making memorable learning experiences. And as we still see in this webinar, there's lots and lots of ways in which you can bring a playful mindset to learning. So we will try some of them out as well. So on that note, you'll see on the slide that there is a top trump card like this one. If you've not played top trumps before, thoroughly recommend it. There's many versions of it. It's the card game where you compare different numerical attributes to win cards from your opponents. It can go on for hours. In this case, though, there's no winners or losers, and you're not going to gain cards. What I'd like you to do, though, is to create your own top trump card to introduce yourself. I'll put the two links in the chat. So this is the link to make your own card. And then we are going to share them on the FigJam board so everyone can see everyone else's identities. Don't overthink it, I should say. just do it, just whatever comes to mind. And I have actually used this for a board meeting. So I chair lots of boards in the university, but in our student experience board, I use this technique to communicate about our strategic plans. So I got people to identify, what their targets were for, I think, engagement, and then what their targets for assessment. And so we used the top trump card approach there, which was quite a neat way of actually communicating some of the key priorities. So you've got both those links in the chat now. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. I'm going to have to keep doing that. Next slide, please. So the other thing that I wanted to try in this session is, rather than just me talk at you for 45 minutes or so, I thought it would be much more fun if we could do something where we create a choose your own adventure / webinar style. So there are 4 parts to the presentation, 4 things that I wanted to cover. You'll have to excuse the terrible jokes. I thought, I'll try and jazz up the titles by asking ChatGPT how it can make them humorous and engaging. And so therefore, those are the terrible jokes that are the kind of subtext for each of the 4 areas. So there's 4 things. One is around using play. One is around challenges in using play, opportunities for using play, and achieving learning outcomes through play. We'll probably have time to cover, they're all intersected. We'll probably, I keep getting distracted by the chat and laughing, which is good. We'll probably have time to cover 3 of them, maybe even 4, depending on how quickly I talk. So what I'd like you to do is, using the Zoom poll, is to vote for your number 1 priority, and hopefully out of that will shake out the order in which we can talk about each of these 4 areas. So Louis, do we have look at that. Oh, the technology works. It's so exciting. Whilst you're doing that, I'm going to chat away. So when I was discussing this session with Louis, we talked about one of the benefits of playful practice is that it gives people agency. So as you'll see later in the session, you can't force people to play, just as you can't force people to learn. So with playful practice, however, you can really set the ground rules around engagement. And I think that's really important for me, that intentionality of how you are scaffolding the interior, the activities and the interventions, and what you intend to get out of them. And then really then getting people to think about how they engage with that. So there's many opportunities to do this with play. And so I try and model what I practice. So that's why I'm asking you to vote today on your priorities. So I'll just give people a couple more times.
Susannah, can I ask you about what do you think it was the most voted topic before I show you the results?
Yes.
What
so
do you think it was the most voted one?
What do I think was the most?
Yeah.
I think it might probably 4, because that's the topic of the webinar. So probably people wanted to talk about that, although people might be interested around the challenges as well. So I'll go with 4 or 2.
There you go. You are spot on for the first one. Yeah, but not the second one.
So what was it? So 4 we've got is the first one. What was the second one?
The second one is opportunities for play. The third
great.
one is very close. Why use play? And the last one, challenges in using play. So I think we have a very favorite audience towards the idea of using playful techniques. That's my understanding, my interpretation.
Fantastic. Right. So the audience has spoken. We will start with then achieving learning outcomes through play, which makes perfect sense. So, right, and now I've got to. So that's the title of the webinar. This is the picture in the background. There is what I call the University in the Sunshine as well. Not really happening today, but anyway. And as I say, a rather terrible ChatGPT joke there about lecture monotony and jumping through hoops. Never mind. So learning outcomes then. So I've covered this to a greater or less degree in all the sections, but it obviously, because of the topic of the seminar today, it's worth looking at it particularly. So let's pop to the next slide. Great. So for me, there are 4 clear ways in which playful learning can enable the achievement of learning outcomes. So firstly, in a slightly meta way, you need to be clear about what you want to achieve when you're setting up playful activities. Oh, can I just ask people to mute so that we've got... Okay. Good. Thank you. So not only what your learning outcomes are, but what your playful learning outcomes are. it's a different way to think about how you can actually engage people in what they're doing. So you need to think about, okay, you've got the learning outcomes for the overall activity, then the ones about how you're going to engage people in order to do that. So for example, if you're using icebreakers at the beginning, you want to set the tone, you want to get people to engage with that. How then will that playful interlude that you're going to put in enable you to do that? If you want to stimulate engagement, you can use play to break up a longer session. If you wish to scaffold reflection at different levels and create new learning, then something like Lego Serious Play might be the answer, or whatever kind of particular tool you want to use. Or if you want to test students on their knowledge, escape rooms can work really, really well. So it's really thinking about that correlation between the learning outcomes and then thinking about how the playful activity can intersect with that. Secondly, and Nuri and I were talking a bit about this when we were prepping for the webinar, thinking that accepting really that play operates on different levels. So when you're using play, the results will occur on many different levels. You don't necessarily know what the outcome is going to be, which is both fantastic and also slightly terrifying at the same time, because the whole intention of using play is it will disrupt the norms. That's one of the reasons that you do it. And also sometimes the immediate impact may not be tangible, and students may come back to it later. So often I find that when I introduce an activity and students engage with it, they look a bit, or they might look at me like I've lost it completely, or they look a bit anxious, or they're thinking about how to do it. And then they'll go through the activity and then we'll reflect on it. And then afterwards it will resonate with them for a much longer period than perhaps if we'd just done something in a more traditional and conventional way. So that kind of initial disorientation of students is often part of the process and is part of the use of play. So you've got to allow some time for that to bring people into the space. Also, they can share their learning in lots of different ways when you use a playful activity. In my experience, it's always the unintended outcomes which using play are often the most interesting and the ones that you need to be prepared for. It really enables you to reflect as a practitioner as well in terms of what you're doing. Thirdly, and related to that point, students have more agency when they play. So they may completely turn an activity on its head. That has happened. They will interpret it in lots and lots of different ways, particularly if you're using quite open questions like I do when I use Lego Serious Play. They're very open questions. And students can sometimes really struggle with that because they expect things to be really codified for them. That's often what they're very used to in learning. But really, for me, the joy and the richness comes when students interpret that in lots of different ways and kind of almost push back a little bit on it and take it into new directions. So they may shape it into something else entirely. So you need to be prepared to create the conditions in which others can act and then accept that that activity may have very different outcomes, not necessarily from the ones that you set originally, but some of the intentions that you hadn't necessarily thought about. And how are you going to be okay with that? That's where that how does the playful activity support the learning outcomes really come in? You need to triangulate that. If there are different options, is that a good thing? If there's different outcomes, how can you bring that into the learning journey and the time for reflection? So it's often being prepared to sit with the discomfort, and believe me, sometimes there can be that discomfort, and that's okay, and let it go. And a lot of it is about letting go of control too. And lastly, then, fourth and finally, and probably most importantly, it really is building in that time for reflection. And this can be both obviously group reflection, individual reflection as well, because in my experience, when I've introduced playful activities, people really do engage on different levels, and it gives them the opportunity to relate to it at different levels as well. So they may have something, but often very personal experiences that come out of the playful activity that they don't always want to share, but they will reflect on it afterwards. So enabling that, putting that into the sessions is really important, and how you reflect as well. So I always say, I have a file that's called "If I Do This Again," in there. Sometimes it's "Don't do that thing," or make sure your instructions are really clear, or allow more time, or whatever it is, because it's a constant reflective process. And if sometimes an activity can just be a nice interlude, and that's fine. But I think it's again being intentional about that. So that's where the reflection time can take and really elevate the activity from something that was just nice to do to something that is really meaningful for students as well. So again, really, really clear on your learning outcomes there. Next slide, please, Louis. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about, the growth mindset, which many of you will be familiar with, because I think for me that relates to why play is really helpful. It supports students and learners in that growth mindset approach. So really thinking about, how can I take this further? What does this mean to me? I might not be able to master this yet. if you can really foster that growth mindset in relation to, one, the development of your learning outcomes, and two, the development of your playful activity, it really situates playful learning in a broader framework and enables you to approach it in a way that gives very clear expectations to learners. So for me, it's about encouraging curious and engaged learners who try to experiment and recognizing that they're learning over time. And I think particularly with the changes in technology and what's happening in our universities and preparing students for whatever they do after university, that kind of mindset of curiousness, engagement, asking questions, being able to fail in a safe way and being okay and reflecting on that is so important. And it's a really useful framing activity in terms of thinking about our learners and engagement in play and creativity. So playful practice really requires us to think very deeply about why we are wanting to engage with our learners, what we're enabling them to do and achieve, and how we want to teach with them, and how they want to enable us as well. And next slide, please. So in each of the sections, what I've done is put a little kind of things that you can try. And so this one was around serious play. So we often, I would talk about play as not being fun, play as doing something that's very serious, but particularly when you're working with adults, and as we'll see when we come to some of the other sessions, there can be a bit of resistance and a bit of anxiety about seeming to get out of your kind of traditional modes of working and comfort zones. So when we do serious play, these are kind of more intentional, longer term activities that can take a little while to design. Escape rooms are great. There's lots of literature on doing that. I have used escape rooms in my own practice to really get students to engage in the concept of followership, which as a theory has some challenges around it, and it's been a really good way to do that. As I say, I've used Lego serious play, or something that Louis and I talked about as well, is I have an activity which I see as play because it's in that kind of expansive mindset, where I take participants on my module to the British Museum, and we do an activity around artifacts and leadership journeys in the British Museum, and just getting them out of that kind of disrupting the norm is fantastic as well. And then also you've got kind of multiplayer games, and often when I started in looking at playful learning, I was really anxious about, that I was going to have to be this great coder that was going to create these like virtual worlds and do these huge games. But actually, it doesn't have to be like that at all. But you can use a lot of games like Minecraft and other multiplayer games into learning spaces as well. And if you're interested in that, there is research on that. So there's some kind of ideas about kind of the more developmental use of play there as well. And just have a think, and I'd nice to know in the chat, like what activity could you think about and start to think about this, because we'll do this at the end to help engage students. And how would you measure the impact? Because measuring the impact can be very, very tricky in terms of some of the playful interventions. How do you really want to gauge your students with it, and what do you want to get out of it? Okay, should we go back then to our choices slide, Louis, and tell me where we were going next?
Give me just a second while you look at the chat box if you want to.
Yes, and I should also, and I meant to, and I didn't, the top trumps activity, I should give a shout out to my colleague at City St George's, Jane Secker, who we did a seminar on this, and it was her suggestion to use the top trumps card, and they're just great. I think that's such a nice way of engaging people, and there's all sorts of things that you could do. And for me, that again, that collaborative nature of play is really helpful, because often you see an idea in one context, and then you can think about how you can use it in the next one as well. Okay, so we've done learning outcomes. Where are we going next, Louis?
I believe it's number 3, if I'm not wrong. So let's click on that one.
Opportunities to play. Lovely. Okay, so this leads really nicely actually to it was quite interesting to break down the webinar into which way we could go through it, because actually all the pathways work, and it's an interesting technique to think about your own lectures and activities to get your students to vote on which bits they might want to see first, and then also in the construction of it, how each piece stands as a separate element in its own. So when thinking about designing and delivering playful activities, people often ask me, like, what's the point? Why should we do this? Particularly sometimes when I'm working with senior staff in the university, like, why are you getting out the Lego, Susannah? And there are many answers to that question, some of which we'll talk about elsewhere, and I've already talked about. But mainly for me, it is that disrupting the norm. And we spend a lot of time in kind of quiet, conventional environments, or perhaps you don't, perhaps you're always doing this activity. But often, we go into something, we replicate the same patterns. And yet when we're working with students and when we're thinking about learning, we often want to disrupt that, because when you start to disrupt it and think differently, then you start to see different perspectives. You disrupt your thought patterns, you're able to see new connections, you accept different positions, and you start to then really see some of the benefits in terms of how that makes that into a learning experience. If you've not watched, there's a YouTube video, put it in the chat, try and find it later, on the backwards bike. And if you think that you're always, that actually, I don't have set patterns in my mind. I'm very open. I'm very inclusive. I always think differently. Watch the backwards bike video and you'll be quite shocked, because I like to think I think differently, but I don't. Let's get it, at times I do, but there are other times when we just replicate the same patterns. So how can we really give students the opportunity to engage in a different way and explore things in a different way? Let's go to the next slide and we'll talk about opportunities for play. So, and I give credit here to Alex Mosley, who is one of my absolute play gurus from, he's now moved to the University of East Anglia, and he's been a real inspiration for me in terms of developing my own playful practice and having the confidence to develop my ideas. So he outlines kind of 4 areas based on the theory that really are foundations to playful learning and enable you to give you some really positive opportunities. So first, as we've talked about, that passing agency to your participants, your learners, whoever they are, to experiment and fail. So when you are playing, the outcomes, as we've seen, are often different from being quite process-based, or they're much more open. So when I use Lego, I will ask participants to build a model on a particular theme or in response to a particular question. And I don't really determine what model they can build unless that's actually part of the activity. What I look for is the levels of meaning and the interpretation. And I think for me, it's always fascinating, particularly with Lego, how you give participants the same bricks and they all build something completely different. And often people really struggle with a very open-ended question. They come back and say they want more detail, and I'm like, it's how you interpret it. So giving students the ability to interpret and critically question in a safe environment is really important, where there's no right or wrong as well. And again, in the structures that we're working in for students, there's often a lot of right and wrong, yet the worlds that they will go into in terms of the lives beyond university, there isn't right and wrong. There's a kind of often real grey areas, and they need to be comfortable with managing that as well. So they have permission to experiment and perhaps think about modelling their needs in different ways. And often their models might need refinement when they're learning through Lego, but it's all about that interpretation and then getting ideas from each other as well. But they are in the driving seat, and for me, that's really, really important. Linked to this is the point that playful learning, particularly in higher education settings, has that lovely blend of creativity and structure. And I often talk about creativity being the sort of, the acceptable word for play. So we talk a lot about creativity. So why not? Let's run with that. And there's a nice intersection there between, encouraging students to develop, bring their own identities in, really interpret things in their own way. And what I often do with play is give them that clear framework, and then they can experiment within it. And I think for adult learners, that's particularly important. So whilst it might be pure play in the sense of the theoretical definition is, play is this like beautiful, limitless space, actually, when you're using it with adults, being really clear on the boundaries can really enable psychological safety and enable them to engage with the activity fully. And trust is absolutely vital to this. The third point is about that kind of optionality, and this is an interesting one, again, thinking about using it in learning. So you can't force people to play, because if you're forcing someone to play, then that goes against a lot of the theory of play. But if we're using it in order to achieve a particular learning outcome, and we're using it in a learning setting, is there an inevitability that we're actually forcing people to play? And this is one I struggle with in my own practice. So again, for me, it's about designing playful opportunities, often that start with quite low risk activities that enable students to engage with that, like icebreakers, like closing sequences, things like that. And also being really explicit to students in the design and the communication of what you're doing, that play is part of it. So as part of the learning contract with the students, in effect, when they're engaging with you and they're on the particular module, play will be part of that, but then also giving parameters around it that demonstrate to students the kind of scope in which they can play, so they can interpret and play as much as they feel comfortable with. And that, for me, play, I think, could be incredibly inclusive, but again, it's thinking about the frameworks and doing it and making sure that you are enabling everyone to participate. And lastly, play. Yeah.
Sorry, go on. That was a very good question, but I'll
okay.
Once you finish the slide, I'll ask.
Okay, cool. We'll come back to it. And lastly, play enables you to focus on people. So how they engage, what they're learning. I always learn so much from people by just engaging with them in play, and how they're responding to a situation. And they learn about themselves as well. And often things will become, by looking at if they're doing a Lego activity or something like that, they compare how they engage with it. And that gives them own insight as well, in a very tangible way, and often in a very safe way as well. So you can think about what actions they're taking, and then also get them to really commit to something as a result of the playful activity that they might have thought about. If you're interested in this, there's a lot more in Norgaard's work, which I've got on the reference around kind of the pedagogies of playful learning and how it enables us to surface implicit values and assumptions, as well as enabling that deeper learning as well, which goes back to the last section we were talking about that link with learning outcomes. But there's something about really engaging with your students so that they enter the spirit of play and what that means for you and how you expect them to play in that space, and to accept the unknowns and try something new. Then there's that openness, and that is really the key to successful playful learning. Louis, you had a question.
Yes, sorry to jump in, but I think there's a very good question in the chat box from Katrina Kalowski. And she asks, do you think the personality or energy of the facilitator can influence the success of educational play?
Yes. Yes. But that's not to say that just if I don't think you have to be somebody that is kind of, the life and soul of the party, but I think you have to be comfortable and confident in yourself. And this is something, it's often a journey. That's why I think doing it in collaboration with others, working with others, always try out your playful activities with someone else. But I've noticed as well that people can often feel uncomfortable. So if I do a Lego activity in a work context, for example, particularly in a board meeting or with some quite senior staff, they might feel a bit awkward about playing in that way, like they're playing with Lego. Is that a bit frivolous? They're not necessarily comfortable with that. They're worried that they're normally expected to have the answer, and I'm putting them into a space where they don't necessarily have the answer, and asking them to respond in a different way and break out of patterns. If I'm really awkward and uncomfortable in that space, that then exacerbates their awkwardness and discomfort. So it's take a deep breath, you put yourself in the room, and you often talk about, this is an experiment, we're going to try it, but it's holding their discomfort. You don't have to take that on as a facilitator. I wouldn't say that I'm always the sort of person that's always cracking jokes. And sometimes I laugh because I think, oh gosh, when I was preparing for this webinar, I was like, gosh, there's a lot of slides. It's very serious. It's all about play. But I think you need to bring your authentic self to whatever that looks like. And I think if you have that authenticity, then that really takes people with you. But it's a great question. Can I come on to it again later?
Thanks, Susannah.
I thought I'd talk a little bit about the difference between games and play. And I think this is really interesting from a cultural perspective and a linguistic perspective, because in English, though, we do distinguish between games and play, but not all languages do that. And I was talking to some colleagues from about different languages and how they don't. And I think that can be really important in thinking about how you use these opportunities and what the cultural expectations are about the activities that you're using, it, particularly in a global context. And when I run sessions with our students, often come from a huge range of nationalities. And again, there's a whole lot of different cultural expectations that you're bringing into the environment around it. So it's interesting thinking about this, about how to use it with adults, though, because games often evolve in a more structured way. They by a kit, we can all think about board games and things like that. Whereas play from the theory is much less structured, much freer, much more undefined, the idea of getting into the kind of spirit of the flow. In my experience working with adults, successful play, as we've kind of talked a little bit about, is merging the boundaries between play and games. So really engendering that spirit of play, but being really clear to the participants when and when they're not playing, because then I think it enables them to kind of enter the spirit of the activity with more openness, with more freedom, and also they'll know it's going to end. So if, usually in the room I say there's, half the room are going, great, we're going to play, it's going to be amazing, and the other half of the room think, why did I do this? And what you're planning to do is bring everyone together into that space. So they go, oh yeah, I got something out of it. I took something away from this. I can see now. I can see something differently. And by bounding play in that way in a formal setting, whether it's time, the resources, the participants, it enables you to do that and be really clear on the rules of engagement. So I think games can be a really great invitation to play. People understand games, particularly in a work context. They get the boundaries, they get the rules, and that can enable them to feel safe and build trust, and then you can kind of develop that as you move forward as well. And there's a difference as well between how you then use that in link to deeper pedagogies, thinking about your learning outcomes, your implicit values and assumptions that you're bringing into the playful practice, and how games can support you to do that. So again, thinking about the different levels that it might do, and where, what's the minimum you expect your students to engage with, and going beyond that. And oh yes, we had another. So I realized when I was preparing for this that I actually recorded in lockdown a whole set of podcast episodes on how you could use play in online settings, and I never actually released them. So this was a whole smorgasbord of ideas about how you could introduce play with a very kind of low entry requirement in a sense. So there's lots of ideas about how you can use color, and some of these I brought into the slides as well. How you can use color, how you can use physical activity to kind of break up a session, how you can engage students on online by talking about their backgrounds or getting them to post ideas in the chat, using mindful techniques, doing various doodles, and also actually being positive sometimes about disengagement. So particularly if you're working with online learners, how you spend a lot of time staring at computer screens, perhaps you want to use play to get them away from the computer, do something differently, and then come back refreshed. I think, using things like I was looking at the asynchronous learning webinar as well on this, in terms of actually, how you bring in things in the chat, how you bring in photos, a bit like we're doing today, so that you can really kind of break things up and have that spirit of play and enable people to engage in a way that works for them as well. So there's lots of different ideas that I've brought into the presentation here. But then think about, what's holding you back from doing this? What implicit assumptions are you making about either yourself or your participants that's perhaps stopping you from doing this? And what activities have you enjoyed that you might be able to bring in to engaging learning? And then last one, I think. So other things.
Susannah, before we go to the last slide of this section, there's a very strong message going on in the chat box, which is release the podcasts. So you must release the podcast.
Oh, how lovely. Thank you. Yeah, I should do. I will do. That's it. You see, this has motivated me now to do it. So I've got some feedback from you. So thank you. I hadn't realized how much effort I'd put into them until I found them again as well. So some other things to try, and it's useful. Liz Cable's got some great, again, it's on the references, got some great work here about using interludes and energizers. She talks about icebreakers and closing, which are really nice, kind of straightforward ways to bring in a bit of a playful mindset into your activity. And I think it's really important. You don't have to be kind of engaging in a full 3-hour Lego serious play session online, or something to bring in play. It can be really small things that can just break up and put in get people to think differently. So mood shifters are really good, particularly if you do things like finding, you can get people to do on a treasure hunt. I get my students to do a treasure hunt around the university. I've also done it online as well with various pictures, so they can find something, bring it back related to a particular theme or an idea that they've had. Mindfulness activities are great, again, about kind of holding the space, getting people to just take a moment to reflect and then re-engage in whatever you're doing. And music as well. So music to encourage some physical activity. Again, you might want to get students to have their cameras off. They might not, they might love it, but or doing things like, and Jane Secker's great on this about, doing icebreakers around bringing in a song that represents your particular style or something like that. It's just kind of fun ways to get people engaging and connect with each other as humans as well. Super. How are we doing for time? Definitely.
I think we still have time for another one. I think
Brilliant.
The third most voted topic was number one.
Number one, to the theory. Okay, so the theory. There's So I think the theory is more interesting than watching paint dry, but I probably would say that. So, from ChatGPT. So there's a list of references at the end, and we can go on to that slide, and I'm happy to share the slides afterwards as well. But as I've said through the presentation, I really have a very expansive definition of play, and really think about playful practice. And what Jane and I have found in our work at City St George's is talking about engaging learning is a really nice way of actually bringing people into this space to start to talk about how they can bring in playful activities as well. So the next slide. So
yeah. Sorry, Susannah, because there's another very interesting question, slightly long, but I think it's important. You can respond while speaking or mentioning these topics. So
yeah.
Isha Khalid asked, how can we make sure that playful learning is effective and engaging for a highly diverse cohort of mature students, considering differences in language, educational backgrounds, and age? So that just for you to consider these different topics while going through these points, if you want to.
Yeah, no, I think that is such a good question, and I'll touch a bit on it now. I think it really is taking that time to sort of do that triangulation between the activity itself, your learning outcomes, and the playful learning outcomes too, to really think about how the three things connect together. In my experience, play can be hugely inclusive. And because if you're using different media, so if you're using something like Lego, or if you're using other like non-text-based activities, that you can actually then enable students to engage in lots of different ways, regardless of their kind of cultural backgrounds, regardless of their language. So if you're using different, if you're using different media, even if you're doing it online, you can use that as well, like photographs or getting people to take pictures or communicate through other means, then you can include people in a different way. But it takes a bit of time and thought, and I think also engage with your students on it. So again, get the feedback from them. I'd suggest as well, you know your students, and it's about bringing them in along with you on the journey. So if you've been teaching in a particular way and then you suddenly slam in a really playful activity, your students are going to be a bit surprised. But if you bring them in gradually, so doing things like the icebreakers, the closing sequences, or activities in the middle to start to get people into that mindset, that really helps. But I think it's thinking, start with this is the learning outcomes for my particular activity. I want to introduce play. Why? What's it going to give me that the way that I'm currently delivering or teaching is not enabling me to do? How does that link to my students, what they're going to get out of it? What might their experiences be bringing to this? And then thinking about which activity will work through that. And this is where it's great to talk to colleagues. There's other organizations like the Playful Learning Association, the Playful Learning Conference are great in terms of giving you that, oh, this person's used this particular technique, I could try that, and get you to ideas, because it's really hard sometimes to think you're sitting there, you think, I want to do something differently. I'm not quite sure which way to go, but how you can adapt things. And don't be scared to try things. That's why I said that some of the low bar activities going, are really helpful to get your confidence going. But don't be scared to try things and reflect that actually where it had that outcome, it did not have that outcome at all. But that's fine. And then you progress and learn. And that is definitely part of the learning experience. And I think there's, for me, that play is so much of what we're trying to do in terms of encouraging learning with our students. So we've talked a lot about play in the broadest sense, and really about us taking us beyond the learning environment, working, different activities, enabling us to be creative, think differently, and getting that different standpoint. And kind of often that's what we want to do with our students, but we're just not necessarily giving them the tools in which to do it. And it's another tool really that you can use to do that. Okay, that's the next slide. So any session on play will probably talk about Huizinga, play being central to life. He talks about the magic circle of play. And although, all theories are contested, and this is a very idealized notion of play, it's really helpful in thinking about play as being fundamental to our existence. And again, I think working with adults, we're playing all the time. in our lives, we often don't think about it as play because we often have very particular views of play, perhaps from our childhood experiences, perhaps awful board game experiences where your siblings were like always beating you at Monopoly. Maybe that's just my personal trauma, those kind of things. So we often have a lot of that baggage there, but we might be playing still. There's all sorts of ways in which you're actually playing in life that often we don't articulate and really think about as play. So this idea that is really fundamental to what we're doing, I really like in terms of theoretical approach. One of the things that we talked about, inclusivity, is really, really important when you're in anything you're doing. You'll know this. You're working with students and working with adult learners who are students, but it's who's included in the play, who's in, who's out. What, by using this activity, who might we be not enabling to play, and actually how can we shift it and change it so it is much more inclusive? And I think play really requires us to do that as well. Again, Nick Whitten and Alex Mosey, I mentioned Alex, but both fantastic on this, and the references are in the book as well about really how to engage adults in play and playfulness, as we've talked about. You could also, another big theorist in this space is Sutton Smith, who talks about 7 rhetorics of play, including play as the hands of fate, play as a form of power, play as power, and as a signifying of the imaginary as well. So when we're thinking about this in relation to adults, they really enable us to think about how do we invite our adult learners to play. What is it that will tap into them, their motivations for learning, and how do we show this is a legitimate activity? And again, that's where the kind of intention comes in that we've talked about. Okay, the next slide. The other couple of other theories that I like to highlight, Stuart Brown's 7 concepts of play, which I think are really helpful, and you can see some of the things that will really attract well with adult learners. So the freedom from time, the desire to continue, things that are kind of more problematic in an adult learning setting. So purposelessness. Is that something that's good with our students? Do we need them to have a stronger sense of purpose about why we're using play? And how do we combine purposelessness with purpose and still make an adult activity? And that's where some of those framing activities come in. How voluntary is the play? Is it voluntary about the level that they engage with? Or is it voluntary that they participate? Does it matter if they don't engage in the activity? But if you're using it in relation to achieve certain outcomes, what do you expect them to do? Perhaps it's just the reflection activity. Perhaps there's a reflection about why they won't play. So what level of engagement do you expect from them? And I think that's just an analogy for learning generally, really. So how do we expect our students to engage? How articulate have we been about that? They might be sitting in a particular learning environment, but they might not be thinking about what you're talking about as an educator at all. So they could be doing anything in that time. So again, how voluntary is learning itself? They're showing up, but are they really showing up? And again, play forces us to have those conversations with our learners. And the last theory I was going to highlight is if you want some really good ways of engaging adult learners with play, have a look at Michael Rosen's book of play. It's very accessible to thinking about play. He really supports the approach that as adults, we're often playing a lot more than we think about. Hence, probably many of us play word games, connections on the New York Times, Wordle, Sudoku, all those kind of things, crosswords. They're all play. All play. So perhaps those are sort of things that you could bring in with your students, understand what other games that they're engaging with. He looks at the history of play through art and words, make believe, toys, and then moves on to think about playful learning as well. And there's lots of really quick, easy activities in that book that can get you thinking. So things about using color, things about using art differently, and this really chimes with my definition of play as this very expansive mindset. He even argues that reading is play, and that it's part of reading, you're engaged in a game together because you're both reading something and then interpreting it. Really interesting. So again, you can use these kind of concepts to reformulate and imagine play and what play looks like in terms of engaging your students. One of the things he suggests is emptying the dishwasher with holding your breath. I have tried to do this, and doing a doodle during a meeting. We've probably all done that as well. And then lastly, some things we've talked a bit about icebreakers already, but some easy kind of non-threatening things to try. You're all doing this now, popping in emojis into the chat, something that you're looking forward to. Really easy way of engaging students in an activity. And again, shapes up. I do this a lot actually with in meetings. Just say, what are you looking forward to? Just completely changes the environment in the meeting. Usually people talk about some amazing things. You learn a lot about people, and it just puts people in a warm space where they feel safer and trusted, and also they've got a voice. Think of a colourful thought. You could again take that as far as you like. You get people to think about a colourful thought that relates to how they are reacting to the material that you've talked about, or just think about any colourful thought, or give them a colour and ask them to think about something that's engaged with it. And getting people to engage in the environment around them, something they can see from their location, all of those kind of icebreakers that bring people into the room. It's so important. Some of the other work that I've done around thinking environments, about how you bring people into a space so that they feel comfortable and that they feel that they're recognized and valued at the beginning of an experience, whether it's a meeting, a learning session, whatever, so that then they feel part of a community, and that community of learning, again, I think is something that's really important to play.
Yeah. And Susannah, I think because this is a community probably interested in online or blended teaching and learning, having these sort of techniques for online students might be even more important.
Yes.
Or before they get into the classroom. So to come up with these ideas where you can break the ice, literally, and make it more connected. So not sure if you have anything in particular for distance education for us.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I actually think, and when I was the podcast series I mentioned before, all those online is a great space, because actually you don't know necessarily the environments your students are engaging in. So you've got this huge global canvas potentially to bring students together. So some of those activities about getting them to post a picture of where they are, or getting them to move away from the computer for 5 minutes and come back with something that they found, or talk about the environment that they're in, or talk about how they could what games they like to play, what games they like to play as children, what games they like to play as adults, would they engage in word games, even just talking to people about what their concept of play and gaming is in their particular cultures. Tells you a lot about how people engaged, and whether it's individual games, whether it's collaborative games, and that can give you a kind of, again, it can bring people into the space. But particularly ideas about how you can use the chat function are brilliant. Things like the FigJam board that I've used as well, kind of giving students various tools. There's lots of platforms as well, like Kahoot and things like that, where you can do online quizzes, but giving students tools, sending them off, and then coming back. I've run escape rooms online as well. You can use that. I think the University of Durham has a really nice framework that you can use to create escape rooms online, in using Teams and Word as well, and putting students into different groups. So there's lots and lots of things that you can do, and I think sometimes it's again thinking about what you want to get out of it in terms of the learning. So is it bringing people into the space? Is it finding out what they're coming with? Is it getting a broader sense of where they're coming from, so I understand what environment they're working in? Is it understanding their concept of games, or is it something more related to their learning outcomes? And depending on the numbers of students you're working with as well. Like when I've done more what I call the serious games, I have sent out things like Lego and things like that. So you can again do things. You can do that online you can create pieces and get them to move that around. So there's all sorts of different things that you can do, and online shouldn't be a barrier at all. If anything, I think it's lots. So you're not constrained by the classroom. I spend a lot of time moving furniture. You don't have to do online.
So Susannah, we have 4 minutes. So there are a few questions, and then we'll have the extra 50 minutes. Do you still want to cover just a couple of slides for topic number 2, or do you want to open the floor? How do you want to proceed?
Should we go to the end and just my kind of I had a few sort of key takeaways from people that might be helpful. Which is and we've got an activity as well for people to do as well. So what we'd like you to do after let's start on the key messages. So I think be confident, take risks. I think anytime you stand up in front of students in whatever setting you're in, whether there's always a risk, particularly online. So there's a risk of technology. What's going to happen? We never quite know what's going to happen in a session. So to take some calculated risks, and talk to your participants. Given you some ideas on how you can engage them through the session. Talk to them, understand where they're coming from, and then what their tolerance might be for whatever games that you want to do. Be really intentional with whatever activities that you're doing. I think we've all probably experienced some awful playful activities. Got some trauma with marshmallows and spaghetti and Play-Doh and that kind of thing, because they're not being thought through in terms of intention. And I think if you're intentional about it and you're clear on your intentions, it will work really well. Trust the process is one of my mantras. That trust the process. You set the learning outcomes, you set the environment, you work with your students. Trust the process. Definitely talk to others. I think all learning is a collaborative activity, and playful learning particularly. Be okay with a bit of discomfort. You might not go exactly how you think, but there will be definite learning from it, particularly if you include that reflective element. That's really becomes it, and it's all learning. And I think one of the great things about play is that you just learn so much from your students as well, whatever setting it's in. And we've got a little activity, haven't we, Louis, for we want to do. So think about what we'd like you to do is think about a playful activity that you could bring into your educational activities and how you might do it. What's the activity? What's the outcome? And who will it work with? And when will you test it? And I'll be really, again, there's lots of things that you can do online as well. So, and then commit an intention to do it. So when are you actually going to be brave and take that step forward and go, yeah, I'm going to try this and see what happens. Particularly something like an icebreaker, an interlude in the middle of a session with online learning. I think that could be really, really powerful way of just shaking up the session a bit and bringing people back into the virtual room. And then again, at a closing point can be really helpful for the reflection. I will stop talking there.
Yeah. So before we have the discussion, I think it would be good to show the references as well, so it will be recorded on the video.
Yes.
So if people want to have a look at the references you mentioned during the session.
Yeah, and also have a look at the Playful Learning Association. If you Google it, you'll find, and they're in the UK, and there's professors that play in America, I think, as well. So there's quite a lot of interest in this space as well.